welcome back. We can continue with the second panel on the fairness in the proposal for a SEP regulation. And just by the way of introduction, my name is Igor Nikolic, and until recently, I was a research fellow here at EUI. Now I work in Nokia, and I will not be commenting on the SEP regulation. This will do our speakers, and everything I say in my personal capacity. So I will just provide a background to the story for those of you who are not familiar with the debate. What are SEPs? Why do we have SEP regulation? So when we talk about SEPs, these are patents that are essential for technical standards. And example of those standards are 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi. These are kind of the type of standards which are now most often in the public debate, but there are other standards like USB, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. They provide connectivity to products. And the new developments, as we all know, we are talking about in new industrial revolution, Internet of Things, and connectivity is spreading to many different applications like cars, in energy sector, smart meters, infrastructure, health devices. And then the question becomes, how do you fairly distribute the value? Because companies which, on the one hand, you have companies that innovate and make this standardized technology, but there are also companies which use these technologies, but also innovate to bring new and improved products on the market. And this is what the Commission attempts to do. On the 27th of April this year, they have published a proposal for a regulation on SEPs. And we have excellent speakers today. Markus Kicia from the European Commission, DG Grow, will present us the regulation. And then afterwards, we can discuss about different aspects of the regulation. We have Evelina Kurgonaite from Fair Standards Alliance, Roya Ghafele, economist from Oxfirst, and Kadambari Prasad from Compass Lexecon. And I will give the floor to Markus Kicia to tell us what does the regulation include and why did we have the regulation in this area. So please, Markus. Do we have slides?
I didn't receive that. Okay.
So we don't have slides. Just tell us.
Yeah, if you have
Oh yeah, you don't need.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here to shed some light on the proposed regulation. I will try without the slides, but since the adoption of the proposal, I have been talking about this topic quite often, so I think I can manage. So the reason first why the Commission has decided to introduce this regulation dates back already to 2017 to the communication on standard essential patents, where the Commission has identified problems in the SEP landscape and SEP licensing environment. One of the problems was a lack of clarity of the SEP landscape, which lies in the opaque or intransparent system of notifications of patents in the standardization process. That because it is the notification process is only dedicated to the standardization process and not to the licensing process. At the end, it is unclear who owns what and how many patents for which standards. So there is a discrepancy also in the detail of the notification of patents in different standardization organizations. In ETSI, the patents must be declared to the organization, Whereas in the SDO IEEE, which covers the Wi-Fi standard, among others, there's so-called blanket declarations. Sufficient, meaning that companies that are taking part in the thank you very much, that are taking part in the standardization process just notify that they have standards without even indicating which patents there are. So this intransparent sub-landscape leads to the lack of transparency as regards the essentiality, because patents are declared during the standardization process, after which the standard is adopted by the organization, but then it is unclear which patents that have been declared in the process are in the standard. And studies have shown that the essentiality rate of certain standards does not exceed 50%. And when you imagine that a SEP holder claims to have a portfolio of 10,000 patents, in reality, it has only 5,000 patents that are truly essential to the standard. And accordingly, the percentage of ownership in the standard is also lower. Now, this lack of transparency leads to a lack of predictability for in particular for patent users, for implementers, which leads to abusive behavior on both sides. SEP holders tend to overestimate the value of their portfolios and tend to overevaluate the licensing rates, whereas implementers tend to delay the taking of a license, sometimes due to the fact that they just don't know how much they have to pay, whether the offer they have received is fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. So there, in the 2017 communication, there was a call on increasing transparency to industry players to enhance the SEP licensing landscape and the SEP ecosystem. There is, of course, the judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union in Huawei ZTE, which is already 7-8 years old, which focuses on good faith negotiations between the SEP holder and the implementer. It is a 4-step licensing exercise or negotiation exercise when it is adhered to, the SEP holder is not deemed to abuse its dominant position. While the judgment is, of course, very much welcome as a clarifying factor, the judgment does not really address the problem that we want to solve with the SEP regulation, which is the lack of transparency and the information asymmetry between SEP holders and implementers. Following the 2017 communication, the Commission adopted the IP Action Plan in 2020 and has indicated that there is a need for creating a predictable and more transparent framework for SEP licensing. Oops. And based on these assessments supported by various expert groups, and after an exhaustive consultation process with stakeholders, the Commission has adopted a regulation on SEPs, which basically rests on 4 pillars. The first one is the organizational structure of the SEP regulation with the creation of the so-called competence center, at the EU IPO, which will implement the SEP regulation in general. It will set up the SEP register and database, and will administer the procedures that are being introduced under the SEP regulation. The procedures foresee the essentiality assessment of declared standard essential patents, the notification or determination of an aggregate royalty, meaning is the maximum license fee for all SEPs for a given standard. And the regulation also introduces a out-of-court alternative dispute resolution mechanism, the so-called front determination, which aims at facilitating negotiations between the SEP holder and implementer to reach an agreement on front terms and conditions. First, the one of the main pillars is the creation of the register and of a database which will include information pertaining to the patents that are declared essential to standards, information about licensing programs, front terms and conditions, information about essentiality, information about the front determination. The register and the procedures aim to increase the transparency and also to increase the trust in the system, to increase awareness of SEPs and the ownership of SEPs and their true essentiality. And the front determination procedure ensures that both parties are able to negotiate, have a good faith negotiation of front terms of a license. As I said, the main pillar is the SEP register, which should create transparency and increase the level playing field, which is now characterized by information asymmetry, with SEP holders holding all the relevant information that is necessary to have to make an informed decision about license fees. Another element which is included in the regulation is the aggregate royalty. It enables SEP holders, but also implementers, to notify a maximum rate for every SEP for a given standard. This should enable implementers to calculate the costs that they have to take into account in determining the final price for the product that they manufacture that implements a standard. Very often, currently, implementers just don't know what and how much they would have to pay for a license, and it creates problems for implementers, in particular for SMEs, when they are confronted with royalty demands. The first question that mostly appears is who else is going to contact me for a SEP license, and how much do I have to pay altogether for a given standard. So this aggregate royalty introduces a fairness for all stakeholders, for implementers, and for SEP holders, which increases the fairness of the SEP ecosystem, which would we hope encourage standardization and innovation by implementers. The SEP register would only be half interesting or functioning if there was no information as regards to essentiality of SEPs in order to tackle the problem of so-called over-declaration. Currently, essentiality checks are conducted by patent pools on a very limited basis and with a not so transparent system. Our proposal for essentiality checks would include a annual essentiality assessment of a sample, of a statistically valid sample of the entire portfolio that has been declared to the competence center, because we understand that it is not feasible to conduct an essentiality check for all of the patents that are declared to the competence center. And within essentiality checks, we want to reveal the true essentiality rates of given portfolios of given SEP holders, knowing that there are SEP holders out there, not necessarily European ones, that like to inflate their SEP portfolios in order to bolster their negotiation position. Finally, the front determination procedure, which should be a part of the negotiation process for SEP licenses. Negotiations take usually several years to come to a conclusion. And very often it is the front rate that remains the only element that is disputed among the stakeholders. This front determination should facilitate negotiations, should speed up the negotiation process, should speed up the conclusion of negotiation processes, should speed up the information exchange between the parties to come to an agreement on front terms. But also acts as a deterrent for SEP holders against their practice to make excessive royalty demands, but also the front determination with the other elements of the proposal would also prevent SEP implementers from applying delaying tactics in order to delay as much as possible the conclusion of a license. As I said, this front determination should facilitate good faith negotiations, because this is in most cases parties want to conclude a license, and this procedure should help them in coming to an understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus, for the explanation of the SEP regulation. And now I will give a word to Evelina to tell us her views about the SEP regulation. Please, Evelina.
Thank you, Igor. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Let me start with the thanks. First and above all to Marco Botta for inviting me, and to Igor for all the prep work. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Markus and others in his unit, as well as Elena Kostadinova, who has since moved to another job at the Commission, for all your work and for making this proposal for the regulation. You probably didn't see Markus, but I kept on nodding, you know, like I was essentially agreeing with everything you were saying. There was maybe just once or twice where you were talking about delaying tactics in negotiations, or on the licensee side, that I wasn't quite sure I agree, and we can come back to that in the discussion part. But overall, whilst we have comments on particular provisions in the proposal, and while we wish the Commission was even bolder and went further, overall we do appreciate this regulatory initiative very much. And I don't say this lightly, because in my own experience of soon 20 years in the EU beat, I don't often find myself celebrating the Commission's endeavors for more regulation. But here we are. The standard essential patent licensing ecosystem in Europe is broken. And we do not see any other way to fix it other than through regulatory measures. And when I say we, I speak on behalf of a very broad industry representation. I speak on behalf of more than 45 European and global companies that are members of the Fair Standards Alliance. FSA membership is very diverse, and it ranges from multinationals to SMEs coming from different levels of the supply chain across multiple industry sectors, from automotive to telecommunications to high tech to broadcasting to smart energy solutions, you name it. And FSA members significantly contribute to innovation in Europe. Annually, the aggregate turnover of FSA members is more than 2.5 trillion euros. And our members invest more than 180 billion into R&D every year. Our members own more than 600,000 patents, including tens of thousands of standard essential patents. So my members have strongly supported standardization for decades as well, participating in hundreds of standardization activities around the world, including in the development of connectivity standards, such as cellular and Wi-Fi. And precisely because many of the FSA members are both owners of SEPs and licensees, this allows us to see this debate from really both sides, if you will. And all this considered, sometimes I think it wouldn't be a total stretch to say that FSA positions reflect the views of businesses at large, except the aggressive SEP monetizers. And my very broad membership finds SEP licensing in Europe to be incredibly inefficient, lacking legal and basic business certainty. There are numerous problems that need to be fixed, and the proposed regulation reflects those industry realities. And that is why I kept nodding when Markus was going through his presentation. And the regulation recognizes that SEP licensing is currently inefficient, unpredictable, intransparent, and that affects Europe's competitiveness and innovation. I was told that the audience at this event is mostly competition professionals who do not necessarily follow this policy debate very closely. So perhaps just a couple of really broad brush reminders, okay? As Igor alluded in his introduction, virtually all of the main areas of economic activity in Europe will be directly affected by connectivity SEP licensing. I would add not only directly, but also adversely. European businesses in multiple industries are already or will soon become potential SEP licensees for standards such as Wi-Fi, LTE, and other wireless communication standards. And that is because only a very small number of European companies own a significant SEP portfolio for these standards. Most of patents for these wireless communication standards are in the hands of players from overseas, such as Huawei, ZTE, LG, Qualcomm, and others. And I think it's very important to remember at all times that SEPs are not your ordinary patents. For patents that are not SEPs, the owners can exercise their monopoly more or less as they please. SEPs, on the other hand, are very special patents because the market power that comes with even one single SEP is so extensive and so mighty that it's been long acknowledged by regulators and courts, including the Court of Justice, as warranting a special regime. And that's because entire industries get locked into these standardized technologies, making it virtually impossible to design around those SEPs. And that is also when companies contribute to technologies to a standard, when they contribute their technologies to a standard, they voluntarily and expressly promise openness to all potential users of that technology, and not on monopoly rates, but on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. And again, that's because SEPs are not your ordinary patents. Businesses large and small encounter multiple challenges related to SEP licensing. And I will focus on the three key challenges that we see within my membership. And those are holdup, refusal to license, and lack of transparency. And just to really very briefly unpack the three. The lock-in I alluded to just a second ago enables SEP monetizers to engage in so-called patent holdup, whereby they leverage their market power to exclude, or indeed merely threaten to exclude, manufacturers in order to extract excessive royalties and otherwise unfair licensing terms. And that's been confirmed in the only EU law we have to date, antitrust case law, by the European Commission and the Court of Justice, the ruling that Markus already spoke about, the Huawei VZT. And there is ample evidence in national court jurisprudence demonstrating that SEP monetizers do use the threat of an injunction, the threat to exclude from the market, in order to force potential licensees to accept terms that the latter consider to be far from fair. And most recently, in a case in the UK, Optus versus Apple, Sir Markus Smith found that the SEP holder was seeking rates that were 50-fold, 50 times what the judge found would be front. So the holdup concern is very significant and very real. Now, as for the refusal to license, numerous businesses, and I see that within my membership because my members, like I said, they come from different levels of a value chain. Numerous businesses are routinely refused SEP licenses on front terms, even when they proactively seek such a license. This most commonly occurs for companies manufacturing components complying with the standard at that level of a component. And particularly components that enable connectivity, which are then sold to manufacturers down the supply chain. And companies in this situation really are stuck between, frankly, a rock and a hard place. They manufacture products for which SEP monetizers refuse them to offer the licenses, despite the component that they manufacture uses the standards and infringes the SEP. And in turn, then their customers, which expect suppliers to sell them products with indemnity, as is really common industry practice, are exposed to patent infringement claims from SEP monetizers. The problem is particularly acute in low margin, high volume markets such as the Internet of Things, affecting numerous IoT market players that are, sadly, in this case, invariably SMEs. And well, third and finally, SEP licensing is characterized by lack of transparency, and there I'm echoing Markus, on every count. This includes the lack of transparency about which patents in our portfolio are truly essential to a standard. Markus mentioned the percentages; they're really shocking. Valuation of SEPs, information in the negotiation process, such as prior licenses to suppliers and customers of the potential licensees. And examples are numerous. Like one of the most common ones is the use of overly secretive non-disclosure agreements, some of which do not even allow licensees to verify whether their suppliers have already concluded relevant licenses. Now, the lack of transparency creates information asymmetry there. Again, I agree fully with Markus, to the detriment of licensees, which SEP monetizers are able to exploit to extract non-front royalties. Now, where courts have examined the full range of comparable licensing agreements of SEP monetizers, they find SMEs and smaller licensees in particular are discriminated against to their competitive disadvantage. The case I mentioned, Optus the Apple, Sir Markus Smith calls that out. There is evidence in the ruling of this kind of practices, black on white. And we believe the proposed regulation is attempting to very meaningfully address those key concerns I just outlined. And like I said, we would have really liked the Commission to go further, but the proposal is a very strong start. So once again, thank you, Markus, and everyone else at the Commission who have contributed to making this regulation proposal, which gives us hope that things might improve in the SEP licensing space. And I will stop there. I suspect that we will be discussing the various elements of the regulation a little bit further down the line.
Thank you, Evelina. Kadambari, may I ask you for your expert opinion as an economist on the proposal overall?
Thank you. Very interesting to hear everybody else. Thank you for joining. For disclosure, I am a consultant. I work with Lexecon. I've worked on numerous arbitration litigation cases, mostly for net licensors. The views are, of course, mine entirely. I want to make a general point, and then I want to make three specific points of detail. So I agree. I think I can see why there is a need for something like this. Over the past 10 years, I've spent so much time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears into these cases that I know more about Fran than I ever wanted to know in my life. And so I can, there is a lot of complexity, there is a lot of detail, and the details are material because there's so much money at stake. So we are in a mess, obviously. And so I can see why there is the need for predictability, for reliability, for transparency, for a bit of structure, for a bit of, the world isn't falling apart, particularly because as we are going into a more connected world, we don't know what the products look like. We don't know what the use cases are. The kind of questions that we are grappling with on standards that are relatively well established, we now will have an orders of magnitude of different types of questions in the other standards. So I see the need for it. However, I do think that the devil is in the details and in the structure. And so I worry about a few things that I would like to talk about over here. And I think my general thinking on this is that we are in a mess, but we are in a mess because it's messy. And I think the only way out is through. And I don't think there is a way to really simplify something that is inherently complicated at its core. But we'll discuss, I'm sure. So the first thing was on the register and the essentiality check. So of course, there's the question of to what extent is this duplicating what we already have at Etsy? There's pretty good database. We've used it quite a lot. It's very dynamic. It has a lot of information. Of course, it doesn't have, all the standards that we would be interested in. So I can see the need for that. But the heavy lifting is, of course, being done by the essentiality checks. And that's, it's really interesting because we've never really, at least I haven't really been able to use it effectively in practice, because whatever information we do have is, on a limited part of the portfolio. There will be a consulting study that looks at, a certain set of patents. There will be of a particular patent holder. It won't be of the industry, but what we're really interested in is, do you, as the licensor whose portfolio we're valuing, do you over-declare compared to the average of the industry? Not do you over-declare in principle, right? So those are the kind of questions that we need to be able to answer. And if there is information on that kind of essentiality ratio for all the licensors, that's something that could be actually quite valuable. The issue, of course, is in how you do it, right? So if, as I understand, SEP holders can propose up to 100 patents for these to be checked for essentiality, are we worried that may not be representative? Do they just pick up the best patents that they think are essential? Do they pick up not the best patents? Because if they don't trust in the system, then have you lost essentiality on something that might actually be essential? So there are things that I think have to be considered on what are the dynamics, what are the incentives for these kind of, for the things that licensors have to do to comply with these things. The second one was on the aggregate royalty determination. Now, this is really tricky. I mean, it's almost the question, right? So as an economist, the way I think about it is that there is, say a particular technology, a standard that has all the technology in it. It's valuable to society because it makes better products. People want those products. There's a economic value that's generated because of that. And as an economist, the way I think about it is that you ask the customers, how much more do you pay for, a glass of water versus one that's connected to something, and that gives you the price premium for that particular product. That's, of course, not the entire economic value, because some of the value goes to implementers, some of the value goes to licensors, the rest of the value goes to consumers, because if I'm buying a connected glass of water, then it's because I value that connected glass of water. So you take the price premium and you have to scale it up almost by adding some assumptions about what you think is going on in the world. And that gives you the total pot of gold that's being generated as a result of the technology. And then you need to ask the question of, well, how do I split that pot of gold into multiple pots of gold, where each of them is the distribution to the stakeholders? So what proportion of that do I think, I as a social planner in this situation, what proportion of that do I think should go to patent holders? What should go to implementers? What should go to consumers? So the aggregate royalty, which is the share that goes to patent holders, that's a very big question. And if we have the answer to that, I think 80% of our problems are solved, because then it's just apportionment. And yes, that has its own issues, because you need to find a metric in order to be able to apportion in a way that's sensible. There's questions about whether patent counts make sense. To what extent do we put in essentiality? Do we look at citations? Do we look at other measures? We want to be able to measure see the heterogeneity in the value of the patents. But that is a problem that's an order of magnitude much lower than the original one, where we're estimating what the value is. So I would love to have an answer to that question. My worry is that we've kind of assumed away the problem. And it reminds me of the joke of the economist on a deserted island and with a can of baked beans and no can opener. And what they want to do is assume a can opener, and then all the problems are solved. So I think if we get to a number, of course, it's fantastic. But my worry is that, A, we don't know this number, as it's very difficult to know it. B, even if, you could take the reduced form view that, we as practitioners, we don't need to do it. The business people, it, surely you know it. You've invested in it, you've made decisions, you do this for a living. Surely you do know how to value these things. And so we could say, you tell me, you know it, you tell me. But the procedure that's in the regulation to get that information out, I'm not sure that gives all the right incentives for truthful revelation, right? And the incentives are entirely different based on the business model. You know, are you a net licensee? Are you a net licensor? If you're a net licensor, you want your rate to be high, individual rate, but you want the aggregate rate to be low because you want the volumes. You know, how do we do these things? What do we do when there's the big range between what people are saying? Do we take a middle point? Does that even make sense? So there are all these questions that I don't really have the answer to, but I worry about some of these things. The other thing is, sorry, on the friend determination. So, you know, closely related, of course, to the things we've been talking about, but I'm a big fan of mandatory arbitration prior to litigation because I think it just makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people in the industry have been saying that this procedure here is actually a form of mandatory arbitration. That is what we're trying to do. So in that sense, it should be quite similar. My worry is that I don't really know, whether the conciliators, is it an administrative part when you're getting experts? Doesn't seem properly adversarial as you would have in an arbitration. Do you actually get to the right number? Are you just hiring a collection of experts, in which case, why not just do arbitration to begin with? So all those questions, I'm not quite sure. And we've been using, as practitioners, we use comparables pretty much all the time. And top down is kind of a add-on, cross-check, section in the end, kind of an approach. What happens here when you have results from the comparables that don't make sense in relation to the aggregate royalty numbers that you've got? So, how do you kind of deal with that kind of dichotomy? So yeah, I have a lot of questions on, how it's going to work, and, partly because I'm sure I don't understand the proposal as well as many people in this room. But yeah, my worry a little bit is that with the devil in the details, I hope we're not entering a world where, there is still litigation, but it's just not in Europe. And people just go to other jurisdictions and do exactly the same thing. So I will stop there.
Thank you very much. And finally, Roya, what's your view on the regulation?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present. Congratulations on this very interesting event. Congratulations also, Igor, for chairing this and for your new job with Nokia. I hope you'll be happy. I feel really privileged to have the opportunity to speak here today. I hope I can contribute. I should also put my cards on the table. So, okay. So I should also put my cards on the table. I'm also an economic consultant, and I'm currently involved in 3 distinct front royalty rate determinations in court proceedings, and I'd rather prefer not to talk about royalty rate determination for that reason. I have had the pleasure also to work with one of your colleagues, with Mr. Padilla, and I recall that on the European Commission's expert group's website, Mr. Padilla disclosed that his principal client remains Qualcomm. I also was last week in Washington and heard a similar discourse. So I guess I can understand from which direction things are coming from, which is okay. But it is one corporate's position to protect their corporate's interests. Yeah, so on this European Commission SEP's policy proposal, I think we've gone a long way. If we look historically how this discourse evolved, when IEEE first started with the idea of why don't we promote transparency, that was a very painful experience for IEEE, I would say. But it is remarkable that the discourse of preserving transparency has been preserved. The catch is always, if you promote transparency, what type of transparency are you promoting, and in which interest is this transparency? If we see one stakeholders association opening champagne, most likely the other stakeholders association is not going to open champagne. And I fully recognize that it is in the nature of politics to be political. But how do you strike the balance as a regulator? That is the really, really, really hard part. And I don't envy anyone who is in these shoes. The big challenge, I mean, Evelina said there are no ordinary patents, but I think SEPs, okay, I think also ordinary patents, there's no such thing as an ordinary patent. And the huge challenge that we're seeing at the moment in the globalism and internationalization of the of technology activity is also reflected in the standard essential patents debate and in a debate on patents also, because we are seeing here a major controversy between a patent system which still expresses to a large extent nationalism and businesses which are global, international, which need global solutions. And we have really difficulties from a legal perspective coming up to grips with where markets are heading. And we have had a patchwork of ideas and suggestions on how to go along with it. My impression is when I was last week in Washington, the United States does not have the impression the World Trade Organization fixed the problem, to put it mildly. So how else to solve it? In the end, the question of how far to reach with a decision, with a governance framework, is a very tricky one. After all, Europe is not alone in the world, even though I love this part of the world very much and enjoy living here a lot. We have on the one hand side the Chinese-United States trade war. We have the United Kingdom, which has left the European Union, which post-Brexit or in an imminent time of Brexit, took the decision in Unwired Planet versus Huawei to take a global decision on the world. And when they did this, I wrote a short article on IPCAT. I said, I don't think the Brits will get away with these neo-colonial fantasies. It's wonderful to take extraterritorial decisions under the argument that this is following market practice, fine, but this is the government or this is the judiciary, this is not the market. So my guess was that at the time when the extraterritorial position of the United Kingdom was made clear, that within probably less than a year, the United States and China will react, and they did. I felt for once reassured. I should have put more money on my bed. So now with this struggle for global hegemony, for global governance, Europe had basically no choice but to also make a global statement. I mean, this is Game of Thrones 2.0. If Europe had said, we're just taking a decision for Europe, it would have looked a bit sad for Europe, quite frankly. But now that we're in this, everyone wanting to have global decision-making power in the SEP space, how will we organize ourselves as global society? Will this be a whichever regulator is fastest to decide question, or will the regulators themselves issue anti-suit injunctions for someone else who took a decision on the same question? It will be very interesting to see. I've worked for the United Nations for many years first as an Austrian diplomat and then within the Secretariat as an economist. And my very honest personal opinion is that the type of governance structures we're seeing in international organizations are too slow. They may be good willing, but this is just way too slow. By the time something happens in an organization with 180, 170 member states, which needs to unanimously decide on something, this is, I don't know, this is too slow. So we still are in this massive struggle between globalism and nationalism. We see international organizations not coming up to speed, and at the same time, various parts of the world basically just saying, well, we'll decide for everyone else. It's not gonna fly, but it points to the very, very challenge we face in international affairs, I think, which is now being pronounced in the standard essential patent space. And how we are gonna resolve it in the end as global society will be incredibly interesting to follow and to watch. And places like here are a great way to start brainstorming about it. Then the other point which I saw is the China-US trade war, in which also the European Union has also got some sort of a position to realize, assume, understand. China has built up important SEPs portfolios, especially on 5G. And in the current trade war, it is very difficult for China with its product markets being essentially cut off to generate revenues. And companies where product markets are being cut off have a certain tendency to do what they can to still keep themselves going. And this can be to assert standard essential patent portfolios. So how, if the national security threat or internet stems from product markets, there needs to be a relationship with how this realizes in markets for standard essential patents also. You cannot cut one off and say, oh, I fixed the products market, and then it pops up in the patent markets. There needs to be some concerted exchange. And unfortunately, IP is usually not on the top agenda of most prime ministers in the world. So we are a bit challenging of bringing also this question to people's attention. The European reply, the third point that I would like to make is the European reply to solving the puzzle of SEP's governance stems fundamentally from a firm belief in the welfare state. The government is going to take care of you, which is the European choice, which is not necessarily rivaled in other parts of the world, and that may have given space to more entrepreneurship and innovation, but has also left people on the streets. If and to what extent the approach of the European welfare state philosophy will work in this specific regulation will need to be seen. Will one centralized institution be able to fix the issues for the world? I think this is something we will have to explore carefully, especially in light of the fact that the Unified Patent Court is also out there and started at the same time. And from the judges that I spoke to, there has been a lot of criticism. The judges were not happy. Some judges said to me, why did I apply for a job in the UPC? If Brussels is deciding this is our responsibility. And why do we throw in now all of these things in Spain? If what are we gonna do? This will be a boring job. So I think there would need to be some sort of conversation with the judiciary at some point, because they will be frustrated. So there are a lot of different questions, but it's for sure a bold move. And let's see how this plays out from a really a truly global governance perspective for innovation, and how other parts of the world will react to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Roya. So I think we have 15-20 minutes for discussion, and I would like to encourage all participants present to raise their hand and ask questions. Also, online participants, we have some questions, and I saw that you have been all taking notes. So it would give an opportunity for the panelists to make comments on each other's presentation. And I would like to throw in a question from Rob in the chat, part of the question, because there are many. So one question is, how do you plan, and by you, I think it's the European Commission, how do you plan to address foreign counterparts? The EU is not the world. So how do you plan to divide the royalty over markets in the world? So I think this is a question which goes to aggregate royalties. I believe it is about parties setting aggregate rates, but then this regulation applies only to the EU. And if anybody else from the audience in the meantime has questions, feel free to raise your hand. So I would like to let you address each other's presentation. And would anybody like to start? Evelina.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I just, I would like to maybe speak a little bit about the aggregate royalty and try to talk to some of the points Kadambari made there. From our point of view, having a non-binding expert opinion on the aggregate royalty is actually a key aspect of the SEP regulation. And in some ways there, maybe I agree that it is one of the questions. we really see it as playing an instrumental role in improving licensing transparency and easing the burden for the parties. It will provide more predictability on the maximum potential cost of implementing a standard before investments are made into product development and companies were locked into the standard. And this could also then serve as the key input to the FRAND rate determination process. And I'll come back to that in a second. We think also that the aggregate royalty mechanism will assist companies in making more informed decisions about which standards to invest to and to support. And we really feel this is one of the absolutely key aspects of the regulation that must be preserved, although improved potentially, for example, that more stakeholders can give their input in the process. Now, to speak to maybe some of Kadambari's concerns, I think you mentioned that, how it would work if the aggregate royalty doesn't really sort of work with comparables. And I think that's why we at FSA believe that as a key input to any substantial FRAND determination, the aggregate royalty should ideally be determined before the FRAND determination takes place. And having published aggregate royalty that is determined through a thorough kind of public and balanced process can facilitate FRAND licensing negotiations before SEP holders and licensees, they can, and that would also include increased transparency. Now, you were also talking about what if there is sort of discrepancy between comparables, and I think there it's probably worthwhile recalling that comparables as we know them today might actually get improved substantially with what the Commission is proposing here. And actually, we are very happy about those proposals and that hope. And there is this hope that this would be improved. Because again, if you look at the recent case law, and I'll go back to the recent UK rulings because they're super informative. That case law provides evidence that SEP holders deliberately start by imposing licenses on small companies first in order to establish comparables that they then seek to impose on larger companies as well. And in Optus versus Apple, the judge referred to Optus counterparties in this comparables exercise as generally small players in the market. And what happens is that unlike Apple or Lenovo or other large companies, smaller companies will have simply taken the licenses. They, regardless of the terms that were imposed on them, because they wouldn't have the resources to go to court and defend against these super FRAND rates. And the judge in Optus v. Apple found that in a nutshell, and I'm quoting, in a nutshell, the Optus comparables are worse than useless at deriving a rate. And then comparables also don't take into account the factors, the hold-up threat, like the companies would have taken licenses against the threat of an injunction. So comparables as we know them today are not fantastic, to put it lightly. And I'm actually really hopeful that the Commission's proposed process will improve that going forward, because the FRAND determination process could actually produce a body of evidence of real comparables going forward and really enhance transparency for the market.
Reply from the panelists who would like to go. Do we have anybody to comment?
I can have a go.
Yeah.
A few of those. So I agree. I think Apple Optus was such an interesting thing to read, because when I first read it, I thought, oh my God, this is bizarre. I've never seen anything like this. And the skepticist in me, I think, just kind of thought, okay, this is just too weird to think about. But then when I thought about it a bit more, the reason why we don't do that usually, so Apple Optus, it was I think it was kind of a combination of comparables and top down. So you take all the licensee royalties and then you apportion based on that. And the reason why we don't usually do that is because of because we believe the ND part will be taken seriously. So you can't, the thing about, licensors being able to sign agreements with really small players, charge them higher royalties, and then use that as a comparable for other players. If you're worth your salt, you shouldn't be doing that. As a consultant, you can't sell it because it just doesn't make sense. You can't. I've seen many people try and sell it. It just doesn't work. It doesn't pass the laugh test. So we typically don't see that kind of problem. At least I don't. But in this one, so the reason why we don't usually do the Apple Optis method is because we think the license SOAR differences across portfolios are more material than the licensee differences. And that may not be the case, right? So I'm still kind of working my head around this. Maybe there is merit to thinking about things in this way. I think, of course, if you have, on the other hand, in the first method, if you have a licensor who consistently holds up, then you have inflated rates. On the other hand, if you have a licensee that consistently holds out, then you have deflated rates. So there is something to be done there. And I guess maybe it depends on what we think is a bigger problem in that particular case.
And can I we have one question from the audience, and then we can have Markus give final thoughts and close the panel. So, Audrey.
Can you hear me well? So exceptionally, I'm going to grant the right to not ask a question, but to make a few comments, if I may. Am I allowed? Yes. The name of my company was mentioned. I'm Audrey Scozzaro-Frazzini, and I work for Qualcomm. I'm going to be very brief. I'm just going to mention name of some companies because I forgot exactly what Evelina said about SEP owners, but I just want to make a statement. There are companies, including Qualcomm, Nokia, Ericsson, Orange, Dolby, Fractus, it's an SME, Fraunhofer, it's not a big company. InterDigital, Panasonic, Philips, Silvels, and other companies that are extremely now suffering. We can hear that some people are drinking champagne. Those companies, their CEOs, their executive team are extremely, extremely nervous about the proposal tabled. I'm sorry, I'm a bit not happy about what I heard. This has been raised at the highest level in many countries. The Commission has to answer, if I'm not mistaken, more than 80 questions asked by member states about the regulation, about the legality, about the legal basis, about the retroactivity of right. And this has not been either presented today or discussed. This is what is happening. It was raised by 3 CEOs at the Trade and Technology Council back in May. Gina Raimondo raised this concern with the European Commission. The US administration is extremely concerned. When we talk about cybersecurity, resilience, network, this is what we're talking about. We're not just talking about one companies like Optis, if I'm not mistaken, in the UK, having a disagreement with Apple. This company can handle. By the way, I don't know if anyone knows Optis, but it's a very different company than the company like, sorry to mention Nokia again, but Nokia or the other company I mentioned. So it is very easy to have ideas about what is happening in the market. I would have welcomed to have a company in this panel to talk about real licensing, to talk about when companies like my company is not paid for this R&D. When there is a
This
company,
was supposed to
not-
be a very brief
Yes, and I'm
comment.
finished.
You're just listing
Evelina,
all your
thank you.
lobbying activities, and I think it's totally inappropriate.
And I am not finished, but I will be finished in a second. So just to say, because I just want to give real time, yeah, you can nod, Evelina, but you don't work for an SEP owner. So I'm the only one that, and I feel like one SEP owner should be able to raise concern. So when a company is not paid for the SEP, as you mentioned, sometimes it's about letting go people. It appeared to me in my life already. It appears another time in my life. It's not fun. It's not lobbying. We're talking about life of people. We're talking about technology choice, for the future. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Okay, a lot to digest. And Markus, could you please give us your closing thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, we have been in touch with Qualcomm and Nokia and other SEP holders as well. Not all SEP holders have the same, let's say, level of nervousness or anxiety. Although I must say on a personal level that I still have not found a valid argument why your CEOs are nervous. Of course, the argument is that they will forego revenues, but it's only stated. It's something that's just stated and but not supported by any by any more substance. It's just we are going to lose. But why? Because of the regulation, and this is not really something that we see from other SEP holders or from companies that are SEP holders and implementers, and they're on both sides, and they see both sides. And from particular from those companies, we have rather a positive reply than from some of SEP holders. There has been contacts in high level contacts. There are still high level contacts. I don't know what the result will be because the proposal is in a legislative process. Because it's not now for us to decide, because we have tabled the proposal. It's now for the co-legislators to continue. And yes, in the council we have to answer to questions from member states, and it's not 80, it's 260. And we are in the process, and we do take this seriously as for any other legislative proposal. And we are continuing this process. To close, that yes, we have taken the step to allow for making global not decisions, but having a global impact with royalty determination and with aggregate royalty. Because SEP licensing is global of global nature. Yes, the UK, US, China have decided that they are able to decide on licenses on a global level because they decide on a sample of SEPs, which represent only a small part of the whole portfolio. And when we agree that it is possible to have a decision for the entire portfolio based on a sample of patents nationally, without really assessing the essentiality or validity of those patents, there is no reason to say that we can cover basically all the entire portfolio, be it globally or not. And if we were to introduce limited licensing, or encourage geographically limit licensing, then we would be departing from the global aspect of licensing, and would be dividing the whole licensing landscape, would make it more complicated for SEP holders, because then they would have to go region by region and to establish regional licensing fees. So I think that we should keep keeping it global. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Markus, for your closing thoughts. We will end the panel here. Thank you all the panelists for participating, and we can continue discussion on SEP regulation on 29th of November. I have been informed that CDS will organize another conference fully dedicated to the SEP regulation. So this will be a perfect place to continue the discussion. Evelina, yes?
Igor, I would also like to say that there will be another conference on the 15th of November in Brussels on SEP licensing. So mark that date as well, please.
There you go, November full of conferences on SAPs. So thank you very much for participating.